Hello, and thank you for joining me on A Psychologist Looks at Scripture. I'm Peter Doherty, a Catholic priest and a psychologist, and I'm pleased that you can join me today. In this podcast, I draw from my background in psychology and Scripture studies to provide fresh insights into the Gospels. The Gospels consistently invite us to deepen our faith, find new wisdom, and grow spiritually. There's always something more to discover together. Each episode of this podcast runs about 7 to 10 minutes. I know my listeners are busy, so I'd like to keep my podcast short. If you have the time and are interested, please check out the earlier episodes listed on the podcast website and on YouTube. I would like to thank all my listeners. Thank you so much for being part of this journey. Your support energizes me to keep podcasting. Please let me know if you have any questions and comments. They truly matter to me. They help keep this podcast grow and flourish. The gospel today from Luke chapter 18, verse 9 to 14 is about a Pharisee and a tax collector praying at the temple. If you haven't already seen this gospel, I have mentioned the scripture passage 2 weeks ago in the podcast that focused on the theme of gratitude. What we have here are two men who are polar opposites in relation to their life choices. It is typical for Jesus to completely reverse a story. We have the Pharisee, a spiritual leader and a teacher. He would be respected and immediately recognizable by his fine clothes and by the respect he commanded. Next to him was a tax collector, a member of the community as well, but despised because he was working with the hated Romans. Tax collectors often kept some of the taxes for themselves, and so were hated by their own people. Remember Zacchaeus, who after meeting Jesus and following his conversion, offers to give back to the people the money he stole. We can read this in Luke chapter 19, verse 1 to 10. Unlike the Pharisee, the tax collector would be seen as a traitor to his people. He would be looked down upon by them. Despite this, however, he ends up being the hero of this story. So we overhear the prayers of two very different men. One man, the Pharisee, has done a lot and includes what he has done in a list expecting to impress God. He was doing okay until he compared himself to the tax collector. The second man, a tax collector, has said little, but admits to his wrongdoing and is truly sorry. It must have come as a shock to the first listeners to this parable. There are several points to this story. Appearances can be deceiving. It's important not to rush to judgment. Also, despite the tax collector's past, he did have one thing the Pharisee lacked, and that was awareness of who he was. I wonder if being aware of where we need to grow and change in our lives is important for the development of our spirituality. I'm not talking about being self-depreciating, but choosing rather to seek self-awareness and humility that might be critical in the development of our spirituality. Likely the Pharisee was not aware that he had completely missed the values of the practice of his faith. Because of his lack of self-awareness, it's likely that he will not see the need for personal growth or recognize opportunities in his life to grow spiritually. On that note, I want to point out that the Pharisee is using his list of good deeds to prop up his own self-esteem and his self-concept. Jesus was well aware of this, and we see in similar scenarios throughout the Gospels. For example, Jesus criticizes the Pharisees for wearing long tassels, found in Matthew chapter 23, verse 5, where Jesus says, "Everything they do is done to be seen by others. They make their phylacteries broad and their tassels long." It is natural to look at one's actions to help determine one's self-identity, but keep in mind my earlier point. Appearances can be deceiving. Actions done solely to make us feel better or look better are not likely to lead to spiritual growth. Being without actions suggests an inactive faith. The scripture that points out this problem of faith without action is found in the letters of James, chapter 2, verse 14 to 26. James emphasizes that faith without works is dead. He says this specifically in James chapter 2, verse 17, meaning that faith alone, without corresponding actions or deeds, is ineffective and lifeless. What is noteworthy here is that faith leads to good works. Sadly, good works do not necessarily by themselves lead to faith. There are many people in our world who have no faith, but have a heart that calls them to do good works. I suspect also, but you may know people who claim to be people of faith, but their faith is separate from who they are. A reflective question that you probably have heard before, but I'd like to repeat it anyway, is the question, if your Christian faith became illegal today, would there be enough evidence for your neighbors to convict you? I urge you to reflect on this question, as it challenges us to look at our faith and how we express our faith in action. Jesus makes this point when he rebukes the scribes and Pharisees by saying they're like whitewashed tombs, which appear beautiful on the outside, but are full of dead men's bones and uncleanness inside. We read this in Matthew chapter 3, verse 27. Hypocrisy often stems from fear, low self-esteem, and a desire to avoid humility and personal responsibility. This psychological tension may lead to inner conflict, known as cognitive dissonance, where one's behaviors do not align with their values or self-image, causing discomfort and stress. People often try to reduce their discomfort by rationalizing or justifying their actions, which can drain mental energy and harm self-esteem. Over time, persistent cognitive dissonance can impair mental health by fostering negative emotions, self-doubt, and avoidance of self-awareness. Maintaining a hypocritical facade can lead to feelings of guilt, anxiety, and fragmentation of identity, as the person struggles to reconcile their true self with the image they want to project. Over time, this can damage mental well-being by fostering self-deception, avoidance of self-awareness, and relational distrust. In the worst case scenario is when the person comes to believe in the facade and are not living reality, and their erroneous beliefs can lead them to actions they would not normally have done. I've worked with people in therapy, and I know it's hard to give up these beliefs and accept reality. They continue to make the same mistakes in their relationships. In many cases, they are stuck in a revolving cycle. Thank you for joining me today. Next Sunday, I will be sharing a new podcast focusing on John chapter 6, verse 37 to 40, where once again we will read about the challenges of unconditional love. If you're new here, I invite you to check out previous episodes on major podcast platforms or YouTube. And for my regular YouTube listeners, please consider subscribing and sharing the podcast with friends who are interested in Scripture and the human sciences. New episodes come out every Sunday, focusing on the week ahead's gospel. Your feedback is always valuable and helps our community to grow. A big thank you to Heather Patel-Doherty and Richard Coulombe for their wonderful help in preparing each episode. If you have any questions or comments, please feel free to email me at peter.doherty, that's DOHERTYOMI, @gmail.com. May God richly bless you.